Well, I'm really excited to be here today with my colleagues, Jackie and Lori. It's been such a pleasure to work with them on this presentation. And I'm very excited to talk about embodied cognition because honestly, there just aren't so many people around us that are thinking in the terms that we're thinking about the body and writing. And I love how varied our perspectives can be on this really exciting journey of learning about mind and body connection. So my name is Allison Ellsworth, and I'm an instructor at Arizona State University at the Polytechnic campus. I work primarily with engineering students, which for me is another really exciting thing, to work with people who have talents that are so foreign to me and ways of thinking that are so foreign to me. But as a composition instructor, one of my greatest pleasures is helping students increase their understanding of how written language works and how to communicate effectively with various audiences. And I'm just going to say that communicating with various audiences is very important when working with engineering students, because that is part of their accreditation document in ABET. For their accreditation, students or programs need to demonstrate that students are having opportunities to learn to write effectively for various audiences. So for me, this is an exciting and challenging work, in part because of the varying writing and language experiences that my students bring to their first-year composition courses. Most of my students, though, regardless of where they are from or their K-12 language arts experience, have little or no experience experimenting with written language or learning the function of the constituent parts of language, including grammar, punctuation, and syntax. Therefore, they struggle to revise their writing so that they more accurately express what it is that they want to communicate in a way that is clear for their audience. So, for example, if I suggest that students reduce the number of prepositional phrases in a sentence to improve clarity for the audience, or move the subject of their sentence closer to the beginning of the sentence, they typically don't know what I mean. So at this point then, in my work with students, and this has been about 6 years ago, I started to search for ways to work with students who really thrive on movement and who want to understand how things work. And so I learned about embodied cognition at that point and some other types of pedagogies that would help students who want to manipulate things. And the importance for me of embodied cognition is helping students understand that how the way that their body is actually constructed helps them understand the world around them, and helps, or it actually impacts the way that they describe the world and their experiences in the world. So I'm going to share my screen now so that you can see what it is, how I'm working with embodied cognition. So I say that the body and its structure impact and inform how we understand and describe the world and our experiences in it. And there's evidence found for this in various fields. First, I would start with cognitive linguistics and Lakoff and Johnson in their 1980 work, Metaphors We Live By. And I call the schemas, the metaphors that they talk about, deeply seated metaphors. They're so intrinsic to us, how we understand the world and how we communicate, that we are not really even aware of them. Cognitive psychology also does a lot with embodied cognition. And Art Glenberg, who is an emeritus professor now at Arizona State University and ran our embodied cognition lab, did a lot of work with students in received language, in reading comprehension, and acting out what it is that they had read so that they could better understand what it is that they had read. Before I get more into embodied cognition and how it impacts my work, I just want to say that it is such a vast and fascinating field that now has impacted robotics, artificial intelligence, education in terms of pedagogy and curricular development. So what I like to tell my students is that because of the way our bodies are oriented, when we talk about relationships, for example. A positive relationship, we would say, is moving forward. If it is moving backward, we would say it is negative. If it's gone off to the side, it's off track. Now, of course, that relationship isn't actually moving anywhere. And Lakoff and Johnson talk about this. But because of the orientation of our body and the way that we move, what we call forward, we consider positive. And there are many other of these schemas that Lakoff and Johnson write about. So I always ask my students to consider, what if they were a crab? Why can I not? Oh, there we go. Okay, if my students had crab bodies and they had a relationship with another crab and it were a positive relationship, how would they describe that? Well, they would probably say that the relationship was moving great. It moved sideways, that the relationship moved that way, that would be positive. Forward could be negative, backward could be negative, but sideways would indicate that the relationship is positive. So what I'm doing with this work, and I've been collecting data since 2019 with my students, is to say, if indeed it is true that our thinking is inextricably connected to the orientation of our body, in other words, how it is constructed, then what if we used our bodies to mimic the function of abstract concepts? So here I have some embodied activities that I created with the help of Art Glenberg, this particular activity, to help students understand the difference between a subject and an object. If I put on the board a sentence and ask students to identify the subject, most often they struggle with that. And this is not a value judgment by any means. This is the nature of education and our language arts education in the United States, and generally speaking in the English speaking world. And that's just how it is. And it's just something that's out there. But when I ask students to gently, with permission, what I call nudge their neighbor and say, you are now the subject. You have embodied what a subject does. It is an agent. It enacts that action. That is the subject of the sentence. And that the person who has been nudged, and we've all been in that situation where our body has been moved by some other force, that is the object. And that we have those in our sentences. We have subjects and we have objects. And once students experience that, something that they're very familiar with, but that they've never connected to these abstract concepts, and especially in writing, they get it. All of a sudden, they'll look at a sentence and they'll say, oh, that's the subject. Whereas before they thought that the object was the sentence. And so I find that very exciting, and they enjoy this work, and it gets them moving and talking with each other and experimenting, because for my student population, that's really important. Here are some other activities that I have used with students to help them understand prepositions. They'll take their hand and, for the basic prepositions, having to do with space and locality, take your hand, put it over, put it under, put it around, put it through, all of that stuff. They understand then the function of what a preposition is. It is pointing out a spatial relationship. Commas are one of my very favorite. When I ask students, what is the function of a comma? Frequently they will say, well, that's where you breathe. And we talk about the history of that notion and how it has come down to us, because it's important for students to understand that they come to the classroom with knowledge of language and different ideas that they have, but to help them refine that understanding. I will give them an object, like I have to create this object, and I'll have a sentence on the board that says something like, go to the desk and bring me a pen, pencil, glue stick, marker, ruler, and not have any commas in between. And then I say to the student, of course, or to the students, of course, that's not a real object. That's not what actually exists in the world, but that's what this sentence says. And then I hand them this bundle of items, and then they physically separate them. And they are then mimicking and embodying the function of a comma to clarify by separating. And so for me, it always goes back to what is the function of the thing and how can we mimic that with our bodies so that students can connect on a more embodied level, of course, but so that they can make that connection between this abstract thing and their actual experiences in the world. That the marks on the page are not just these abstract things that they throw out there, and that they can manipulate them and impact the meaning through that manipulation. So I just want to explain, though, that these embodied activities are the first part of an intervention that I have used to help students be able to communicate more effectively what it is that they want to say. So this is not prescriptive in that way, but is what they've put on the screen or on the page actually what it is that they're wanting to communicate? And do they need to manipulate that? And how can they do that? After we've gone through these embodied activities, and it's important that these come first before we move on to another set of activities that that I'm not going to have time to describe here, but just know that this is part one of an intervention. So after taking students through all of this, of course, I'm collecting data the whole time, and they're responding to questions, they're filling out surveys, they're doing all of these things. So I want to share with you some of that data. And this is early data. This is 2019, and I've tried collecting more data. COVID has made that exceptionally difficult. I've not yet found a super effective way to do this over Zoom. If I could, that would be so exciting. But my findings are that engagement with grammar and language, syntax, all of those things increase. And students have this entryway now to work with language in ways that is not intimidating and is not negative. Most of my students have negative feelings about writing. That's just, and actually, I really enjoy working with what I call reluctant writers. That for me is very fun. So they also have improved attitudes toward academic writing. It's no longer this thing that's out there that is so foreign to them, and that they actually have improved use of these conventions that they will need to master as they move on in their technical writing classes and things like that. Here are some quotes from students from surveys that they filled out in free answer sections. They enjoyed, and I did code these, and so these were some of the codes that I came up with. Physicality versus passivity. I enjoyed doing things rather than being lectured at. I most enjoyed the action. Often we are just sitting, and they meant in other classes, but these activities got us involved. So they were participants in language. They weren't just necessarily transcribing the thoughts in their head or just doing what someone told them that they had to do. They got to experiment and experience language. It was new. We were able to get out of our seats and try a different way of learning. I understood what we were doing from a different angle. And what I really like about that is that it does remove that privilege of, of the brain only, but that it promotes that brain-body connection that's already there, but it calls attention to it and uses that. And then this is a shared experience. And they say the more interaction, the better. And interacting with my peers as a group and as a whole class. So they really enjoyed that. I also have some data from surveys that students filled out. And I can't just go through all of this like I wish I could, but what I was really excited about was that after students became familiar with and had practiced these embodied activities, the majority of them strongly agreed that they understood the function of a comma better, or subjects versus objects, conjunctions, verbs of being, clauses, elements of language that I want them to be familiar with so that they can manipulate them and use them as tools, again, so that they can articulate what it is that they want to say in a way that is received most often or more often by their audience, the way that they want their audience to receive that. So this was very encouraging. And I am, like I said, continuing to collect this data. Here's my contact information for anybody that would like to talk with me more about this work that I'm doing. So here's my email address. Again, I'm at Arizona State University at the Polytechnic campus, and I work in the College of Integrative Sciences and Arts. I'm excited to continue this work, and I'm excited to continue these conversations with other folks who are interested in writing and embodied cognition. Thank you.